Vale. Pues buenos días, seguimos con las jornadas. Ahora tenemos a Finn Ross. Finn Ross es fundador y director creativo de Fry Studios y es uno de los videodiseñadores más reputados a nivel internacional. Especializado en artes escénicas y ganador de numerosos galardones, entre ellos 2 Olivier, un Tony y 3 premios Drama Desk. Finn comenzó explorando las posibilidades de la videoescena a comienzos de la primera década del 2000 de la mano de compañías como Complicité y de English National Opera. Su trabajo actual se centra en proyectos de grandes dimensiones con equipos multidisciplinares complejos y sus montajes teatrales más recientes incluyen títulos como Regreso al futuro, Los Miserables, Harry Potter y el legado maldito, El curioso incidente del perro a medianoche o La tempestad. Okay, Finn. Good morning. This is your turn.
Hello, how are you?
Fine, thanks.
Good. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not there with you in Madrid, but the British government is making it very difficult for me to go anywhere right now. So sadly, I am here by Zoom, which I'm sure by now. But anyway, I wanted to talk to you today, I guess, about tools for storytelling, how I kind of find and approach my work and how I go about it, and share with you some photos, videos, and examples. And then I think we have some time at the end for questions and conversation. So without further ado, I shall begin. I think thank you very much for a very excellent introduction. It's really nice to speak to a group of theatre professionals and also other video designers today, as it's a chance I rarely get. But you know, my name's Finn. I'm a video designer, and I've been doing this for about 15 years now, and I've found it very interesting how everything has changed and grown continually. With every new year there is a new invention, and that has continued to change how we work. And I think that I can very much trace through my own work and see where we're at now, especially in the last year or so. You know, video design, it's kind of an interesting thing. When I left home and went to study theatre, it didn't exist as a job. There wasn't a name for it. So over the past 15 to 20 years, it's been really interesting to see it come to a maturity and be understood. I think I'll talk to you about how I go about it. So the first thing I think that's really important to talk about before you begin designing anything is collaboration. I think good design is made by many people. And video is no exception to that, because it can be incredibly technical as well as very creative, and it needs a large group of people to make that. But also it needs producers to pay for it, because it's not the cheapest thing in the world to do. So I think it's really important at the beginning of any project to seek to create an atmosphere of collaboration with those you are working with other designers on the team, with producers, with directors, with stage managers, and then within your own team and also your own head. Because I think the more ideas that sort of go into something, the more interesting it can become. And that is very important to me and my studio in how we approach our work. No one owns an idea, the show owns the idea, and we all contribute to building the layers and layers that make that idea up. And by the time it gets onto the stage, you can't really tell where it began or ended, but you just know it's working. That to me feels like a really important process to have in place when making the work. So, you know, before I do anything, I always want to create a place where we can collaborate and where everyone's voice can be heard. And I think that sort of is a really, it's a very important thing to me. So, you know, I thought I might just say like a little bit about how I got to to doing what I'm doing now. You know, when I was very young, I wanted to create something, but I couldn't draw, I couldn't paint, I couldn't sculpt. I was very bad with my hands. So I couldn't find a way to express that. And photography was something that I chanced upon, and that kind of gave me a way to create an image and compose an image that, you know, I could control, but without having to coordinate things and deal with paint and everything else. And, you know, then I went off to London to sort of study theatre. And when I was working there, I met a choreographer called Isabella Rocamora, who used video a lot in her work. And that was, for me, how I first became aware of this medium. And first started to understand how you can compose a video image into the scenography of a piece of live performance. And you know, back in those days, it was fairly simple and not nearly as complicated as it is now. But it really opened the door for me and showed me that that was something I wanted to do. And I began working with a collective called Mesmer that at the time was led by Dick. And they were very much a video design kind of collective who deserve a huge amount of credit, I think, for defining the idea of a video designer nowadays, because they fought really hard to make that happen. And, you know, I started doing work with companies like Complicité and Vanishing Point and the Traverse Theatre and various opera companies that were also very collaborative, but very experimental in their approach. So, you know, we had these huge canvases to play with to sound out and find the ideas. And I think that's where my kind of practice formed. And, you know, as we kind of grow and develop, you know, we continue to kind of think and assess our practice and develop it to make it better. Because, you know, I think our medium is a new one still. I think we're growing, we're changing every year in how people perceive and understand our work. And I think it's important to be conscious of that. So I think the reason I do what I do is because I like to create an experience for an audience. I like to tell them a story and take them on a journey through an evening. I'm interested at the intersection between the performer, the wider theatrical context, and my own work, and where all those things join together to sort of create a moment that is part of the story of that experience. And I find video a fascinating tool to use in this, which I'll go into more later. But what I kind of also find really interesting is the idea of narrative and how we start in one place, we go somewhere else, and how that kind of takes us to the end. And everything we do along the way to get there fascinates me. And, you know, I do this in both, you know, commercial and subsidized contexts. And, you know, another thing that's really important for me is music and a connection to live music, and making my work move with the music and the sort of the drama of the stage. So, you know, I think a question is, how do we tell these stories on stage? How does video become involved in the storytelling of the evening? And I must say, when I kind of asked myself this question at first, I wasn't really sure of the answer, because I think we get so used to just doing what we do that we sometimes forget to think about how we do it, and ask ourselves those important questions about process. So, you know, I thought about everything I had done and what I found interesting. And I think I concluded that video gets used in about maybe 5 different ways. You know, I think the most boring is weather. Like, I have projected a lot of clouds in my time. I've projected a lot of snow, a lot of rain. I don't know why, but we are always doing weather. I mean, we're inside a building, but still we need to bring the outside inside. I guess just the dynamic of that is interesting. But yeah, weather is used a lot. I don't think it's very interesting, but it happens. The next thing video I think that can do in a space is texture the stage. It can kind of pick up where lighting ends and sort of carry that further, bring movement to it, bring a sort of dynamic, sort of multi-dimensional energy, which is kind of cool. And then when you start texturing the stage, you have the ability to transform the stage. And that's where I think it gets really interesting, because theatre and storytelling is about transformations. It's about taking an expectation and confronting it or undoing it or looking at the other side of it. And I think when you can do that visually as well as sort of dramaturgically, that's really exciting. So then the next layer to that, I think, is going inside people's heads, which is where I get really interested in it. It is using video as a psychological tool within the space. So you can reach inside the mind of a character and show the audience and the wider world how that character is feeling and behaving, and make the stage come alive with their energy, which leads me to the final, and I think my favorite way to kind of use video on stages is to make the stage into a truly psychological space where the video design becomes another character in the show, and it has a voice, albeit a non-verbal one, an opinion, and an ability to influence the narrative and the storytelling of what's happening and be part of that. And that is where things get really interesting for me. And I think it's where I find I work my best, because in order to do that, you have to do it for the whole evening. You can't just sort of come in and out. You've got to be there. So what I'll do now is sort of just go through a couple of these different examples of how, me and my team have done this in our work. So the first one is a little video, which hopefully will play. Yes, is Frozen, which is an adaptation of the movie we all know, whether we want to or not, which we have been working on for what feels like a very, very long time now. But I think Frozen is a great example of transformation physically in the space, because we go from a world of sort of wood and stone to a world of snow and ice, in 16 bars of music in Act 1. And that is the entire stage has to shift. And then also we transform, we go through transformations from Elsa's perspective as she learns to understand herself and accept herself. And through doing that, she kind of gains, power and insight and control. So, Frozen, it's a very interesting, as much as it is a very commercial, very sort of silly show, it's also quite interesting in some of the techniques that we've been able to use in there. So, for example, the Aurora Borealis, which is in the sky that's present for almost the whole evening, is very much connected to her emotions and her feelings and can respond to her. So, when she's happy, the colors lighten up. When she's angry, the colors darken. Its speed, its direction, its shape all changes depending on how she's feeling. And that, is a nice touch. I think the next example is about building an entire world out of video, which we did on Mean Girls, the musical, which is very much, again, about almost a continual transformation, because the musical was almost written as if it was a film. Scenes are sometimes 5 sentences long, and then you've got to move on to the next place, because, who wrote it sort of wrote it to have that fluidity. So it's quite interesting in the sense that we build this entire world of a school and these characters all evening that can move along. But then also we have a really interesting power to subvert and change it for creative use. Katie Mitchell has this kind of brilliant theory that you build rules for a production and you build rules for a design. And then at one point in the evening, you can completely break those. So from a very kind of normal space in Mean Girls, we're suddenly able to shift to something that's incredibly operatic and abstract, to go again inside one of our characters' heads as they are having a pivotal moment in the story, and support them and help them tell that. And you know, Mean Girls is kind of an interesting example of something that's incredibly commercial, but has these interesting kind of creative touches to it, which, you know, makes it a very special project for all of us. Plus the total nature of it, the set is built of video. So you're very much building the world for the characters and for them to live in. And you're ending up at that interesting space where you, as a video designer, sit somewhere between a video designer and a set designer, which is, you know, probably a whole other panel conversation and discussion to be had. Moving on, Curious Incident is of the dog in the nighttime, is another really interesting example of using video to look inside a character's head and try and help the audience understand them. Christopher, the central character, is on the spectrum. It's never defined whether he has Asperger's or whether he has Downs or anything. He is just on the spectrum. He doesn't function like the rest of us. I think that's the important thing. His responses to things are different to our responses to things. And I think to understand the story on stage, it's very important to help the audience and see the world from his point of view, both magical and terrifying. And, you know, what we really do with video is we totally explode what's in here for him and bring it out onto the stage and use things like his love of prime numbers as a kind of soothing, calming thing and take him into outer space because he thinks he'll be happy there. But then when he's trying to get on a train, we make the world absolutely terrifying and really, really punish the character in order for him to kind of earn the safety we feel he should have when he reaches his mother. But actually a whole other kind of danger exists there that's much more from the people on stage. So, you know, it's interesting how video joins in kind of creating that atmosphere on this piece. And I think it's also worth saying the show is 10 years old this year. And for me, it's a really special piece because it's one of those rare moments, I think, where the work we make can actually have an impact on the individual who sees it and can help people ask questions about themselves and understand themselves better. And, you know, it's a legacy I'm so proud of, and I'm so pleased we'll continue into the future where we're starting another 4 soon, which is UK and to become European. So that's exciting. Finally, while sort of talking through examples of work, is the psychological space that I spoke about. There was a production called Chimerica that we did in 2013, which was about cultural differences largely, and about how China and America can maybe never understand each other because they are coming at things from completely different perspectives. Sort of told through the eyes of a photographer who took the Tiananmen Square Ant-Man photo, that photograph of the man sort of holding the shopping bags up to the tank. I mean, there were actually 7 photographers who took that photo, but we focus on this one fictitious one. And his friend in China. And video basically sits on this white cube all night long in various different configurations as it turns and turns and turns, and it always becomes something new. And it always has something to say about what's happening in the scene. There is always the film strip along the top and the bottom, because we're always viewing it through a photograph. So we're viewing it through the eye of the photographer, who is the protagonist and the storyteller. It sort of outwardly represents location, but inwardly creates things much more sinister as well, just by kind of being able to shift tone and atmosphere, really by working with Ez Devlin, who is the set designer, to create this sort of multi-dimensional space. And then also Tim Lutkin, who is a lighting designer. So the kind of use of light is very, very refined, but very in coordination with what the video is doing. I mean, I think for me, it's one of my favorite projects ever. It was very short. It was very simple. we had absolutely no money and we just had to make up a way of doing something that we weren't really sure was possible, which was, tracking this box as it turned, because back then motion tracking of scenery was in the sort of scale of the Eurovision Song Contest. It was something that needed huge amounts of money and people, and this was me and another technician trying to work out how to do it. So, by kind of, having a tiny piece of paper and turning it around continuously and drawing angles and times on it, we made it work. And, I think for overcoming the technical challenge as well as the creative challenge, that was really exciting for me. So, those are, I guess, the stories that I've told on stage and the ways that I like to do it. So now I think it's worth talking about like how we choose the tools to tell the story. Like, how do we actually make our work? And I really want to point out as well, this is just my approach. I don't think that there is any perfect approach, and I am by no means saying this is how everyone should do it. I could be completely wrong, but this is how I've learned to do it through many years of trial and error. I wonder if it's worth also taking a slight step backwards, because the video designer themselves is a strange creature. We take on lots and lots of different tool sets, and we often come from lots and lots of different backgrounds. My way in was through photography and theatre. One of my colleagues' ways in was through lighting design. Another of my friends, her way into it was through film school. So, we all come at it different ways, but I think fundamentally there are three things we all have, and some of us have it in more, some of us have less. But I think you need to understand theatre. You need to understand how theatre works, how its stories are told, what it is as a creative medium, because how you tell a story in theatre is very different to how you tell a story in a film or a book or a piece of poetry or anything. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that, but I think understanding that is important when you're coming at it from a digital medium like video, which is so often, which is sort of derived from film. I think we all have some understanding of how to make video content. Like, I could never edit a film, but I can produce content to fit in as part of a stage picture. And then finally, we sort of need to understand how the world of the stage works, like what people are doing, how things are happening, because if you're not familiar with it, it's a very strange world if you come at it from a film world, for example. Like, I grew up in theatre, so it makes sense to be, but my friends who came in from film were like, you people are all crazy. But then when I've gone and worked on film sets, I'm like, you people are all crazy. But, through kind of experiencing each other's work, I think we kind of learn and grow. So when making video content, particularly, there are so many choices. There's 2D animation, there's 3D animation, there's illustration, there's cell animation, there is filming and compositing. Sorry, excuse me. You can use matte painting, you can use real-time technologies. It's like almost impossible to know where to begin sometimes. Excuse me. However, usually I find the show has a way of telling you, and the other designers who are working with you on the team have a way of informing that. Sometimes just from looking at the set design, it has a very specific aesthetic. So, it makes sense to go down a particular route. Sometimes a show has, a very kind of crisp, clean thing. So you're doing something very abstract. It all depends. And also, I think there's that moment that you can't explain and you can't define. And I wish I could tell you all now what it is. But, when you kind of read a piece or listen to the music, it somehow starts to tell you what it wants to look like. And kind of that is one of those things that I still haven't worked out how it happens, but it does. And it's really important to sort of give yourself the space and the time to let that come to you as well, I think. So yeah, it's interesting. I think one thing that is really interesting to talk about nowadays, particularly now at this moment, is 3D. For a very, very long time, we were very scared of 3D, I think I would say. It was this mysterious thing that we didn't understand and we were terrified of. It was expensive and complicated and needed lots of computers, and it was really slow to render, and it didn't work like After Effects. It had all these other strange rules that we just didn't really get. However, nowadays I think we're at this point now where the kind of 2D workflow is becoming very secondary to the 3D workflow, even if it's to try and produce something that doesn't appear 3D or doesn't need to exist in a three-dimensional environment. Because a lot of the media servers that we play our content back on are starting to work in a three-dimensional space, or certainly support that. But when we first engaged with 3D, it was a very long time ago, where we made La Clemenza di Tito for Opera North. And we decided to take this moment because the design that was proposed, that me and the director came up with, was like, how do you build the city of Rome out of shifting, moving planes of light, rather than very literal architecture? How do you make a kind of a video design where you can't quite tell where the video design begins and the lighting design ends, and where they're one of the two same things? So we had this absolute rule that there would be no clouds, no weather, no fire, because Rome burns as part of the show. And it would all be told through abstraction. And the way that we thought to do this would be through taking a three-dimensional approach by having a 3D model of our set and lighting it in strange and different ways, and then breaking that set apart into different things, kind of opening up panels and doors, and creating this sort of constant choreography of kind of light and motion, very much in collaboration with a wonderful lighting designer, Bruno Poet. And it was difficult because back in 2013, computers were slow to render things, and we were slow to learn the tricks we needed to learn. I think if we did that show now, it would be very easy. But also, the challenge is good because it makes you really focus on what you need, not everything you can have. And I think that's a really important sort of important to have restraints, otherwise you can go crazy. But it nearly killed us. But I think by the end we did make something that I'm still really proud of today. That was a sort of beautiful blend of sort of light and architecture and scenery. And for us, I think as well, it was really important to shake up how we made shows and take a step forward and try something new, because if we don't do that, then we'd all still be using Pani projectors or, large, 35mm slide projectors. Not to say that that isn't an approach that one should take nowadays either, but I think we can tell stories differently now because we take these risks and we find these things out. So now 3D for me is a really big important part of the process, because this is an example of some sort of look development from the Nutcracker that we did for Atlanta Ballet, because it's a great way for large groups of people to work together into the same thing, but you can really kind of build something very specific for the look of your show because you are making it all. You're not having to kind of work with found elements. You're not having to work with stock footage. You're able to kind of create these kind of dense, gorgeous worlds that kind of can give the audience a kind of a deeper experience. Because, for example, in this Nutcracker, sorry, this is where I reveal I can't use PowerPoint. Everything that's kind of in this show relates in some way to something that's on the stage, or something that was in, Tom Pye was the set designer, something that's in his set design. So the brief for the show is it should look like a Joseph Cornell kind of vitrine come to life. So, you know, all of his work is made of found objects and textures. So we decided we would make a 3D world, but we would only texture it with textures that we found from, you know, old sketchbooks, old etchings, just anything of this kind of late Victorian period that we were sort of deriving it in. And, you know, by taking this approach, you know, it kind of feels very faithful to all the textures that appear on the stage as well. And, you know, gives something that it sort of lives on the level of fantasy and fun that someone like Drosselmeyer, who's the featured character in the show, has. So, you know, I mean, ultimately, this isn't maybe the greatest example because it is playing a movie for an overture, but we've all done it. It's not the cleverest thing to do, but it does help people kind of understand the story, which I think is also a really important thing, is making sure everyone knows it. But also, you know, we kind of use it to make texture for scenery now as well. So this is from Frozen, where we were really searching for different ways to kind of make ice, but make ice that was very specific to our scenery. So it really belonged to the cracks and contours of the actual scenic pieces themselves. So, you know, when we first made the show, we didn't use this technique, but then when we came back to it for the US tour in 2019, we employed a different technique, which was using kind of Substance Designer and Redshift to basically kind of paint and build our own custom textures. And, you know, it's quite nice as you kind of find these new tools as you go along. You go back to old designs and reconsider them as something new, which I think is great. But having said all of that about 3D, I think there is also an enormous place still for traditional approaches. For the production of the concert of Les Mis that's currently playing in London, and also the full West End and international production of it, you know, a very traditional kind of matte painting approach is used. That these are all sort of gorgeous painted backdrops that are very lightly animated, that very much have the texture and feeling of a huge canvas or painting hanging upstage. It's just ever so slightly alive. So it's, you know, just got a touch of magic, but it's not overly clever. So, you know, I think that those are all sort of ways in which we've approached kind of making our shows and sort of getting into the real kind of nuts and bolts of, you know, how we actually make an image for the stage. I think the next really important thing to talk about is your team. As not to say that people are a tool, but the people you spend your time with while making your shows are hugely important. This is some of the team from Frozen standing on top of a huge mountain somewhere. And I think it's really, really important to think about people as much as you think about software and hardware, because people are ultimately what's going to bring this alive. Because making theatre can take really long hours, really hard work. It can be really tiring. And frankly, some people in the room, they're bastards. Like, we've all worked with horrific directors, nightmare set designers, crazy producers, and you need a great team of people around you when things get tough. Otherwise, you know, it can be a horrible experience making a show. And, you know, we're never paid enough. There is never enough time. So in order to kind of make up for those things, we need to at least have a good time making the show. Because, you know, fun is a really important part of it. This is us playing pranks on an associate lighting designer because we decided to wrap his laptop in cling film because that day it was just the thing we needed to do to let off tension. And I think it's really important to have a team that can kind of get you through that. And I spend a lot of time choosing the people that I want to work with on a show, and a lot of time, persuading producers, persuading productions to let me have the team I want with me, because it makes such a huge difference, not only to your experience, but also your outcomes. So while I really don't want to talk about people as a tool, I think they're an important part in the set of operating your tools. And on that subject of collaboration, back in 2015, Adam Young, my very long-term collaborator, and myself chose to kind of found Frey, which is our studio based in London, because we wanted to create a place for collaboration where we could take the work and the approach that we had been developing over several years and share it with others and bring other people to that. So, now we're a team of 5, soon growing to 6. And, we all kind of work along the same ethos, which is really important to us. It's also a space for us to educate and bring new people into the industry and create new non-traditional pathways into live entertainment that don't necessarily exist for everyone. So we have Frey Dev, which is our education program that we run for graduates and those who are new to our industry, where they can come and we issue a brief based on a brief that we've had in the show and guide them through the process of responding to that brief. And we do 4 of them a year, and so far it's been really successful. And we're teaming up with Disguise and some other software companies to further enhance that offering. So that's quite exciting. And yeah, now I just thought it'd be interesting to sort of talk about the future, like where is all of this going? A modern video designer, as we recognize it now, has grown and changed very quickly over the past 15 years. And I think our industry is at another interesting turning point as well with the arrival of real-time video technologies. And our first experience of this was with The Tempest at the Royal Shakespeare Company in 2016. By real-time technology, I mean video content that isn't rendered as a movie file, but is rendered directly on the media server and played out live to stage, or that is rendered live on another computer and streamed into the media server. So it is a kind of living stream of ones and zeros that can be affected and changed instantly by the actions that happen on stage. Therefore, meaning you can make animation as fluid and controllable as a moving light, which for me is incredibly exciting because I've often felt very frustrated by waiting for video content to render when we have a new idea and we go like, well, we want to try this. So, with real-time tools, we can make that process much, much faster. Tempest at the RSC, the brief was to take the character of Ariel, who is Prospero's magical sprite, and whenever he is being magical, have him be a live motion captured magical manifestation of that sprite on stage in several different disguises. He's a water nymph, he's a tree elf, he's all sorts of magical things, and flies around the space doing all sorts of things, all driven by the actor and his movements and his voice, all built into a kind of wider world of video. So the space, we managed to somehow, and I still don't know how, fit 27 projectors into the Royal Shakespeare Theatre to cover every inch of the set with video, to make a kind of environment that could be quite normal and a normal piece of scenery at one point, and then when Ariel's magic takes over, completely manifest and change into something totally different. And I think our justification with doing this was Shakespeare wrote the play originally to show off the theatrical the new theatre technology of the day. therefore, our brief to ourselves was, well, let's do the same thing, but in 2016. And we worked with Imaginarium, who some of you might know from Lord of the Rings and other things, who do all the sort of motion capture for Hollywood films and the character design, to actually work out how to do this, because we didn't know how to do motion capture in the theatre. So Imaginarium brought that experience and that design to us. And then we brought it into our disguise systems and sort of fused the two together into one show, which was really exciting and a fun thing for us to do. And it was one of those things that where we started doing it, we had an idea that it was possible, but we didn't know it was possible. But by the end, but we knew there was a process that would take us to possible. And again, I think it goes back to taking those creative risks to move your practice forward. Another example of sort of moving on was Frozen. I spoke briefly about the Aurora Borealis earlier. That is another piece of real-time content. So it's rendered in the media server live every single night according to a series of parameters we lay out. So whenever the actress does things, we can fire a cue and the environment will change magically around her. It's a really exciting thing to watch happen, because it makes the animation feel fluid, and it makes it really feel like it belongs to her. But as an actress, she doesn't have to do exactly the same thing every single night. She can be free, because even in moments where we are running to music, sometimes that music doesn't run to time code, so they can be more free with it. So what we can do is make animation that looks like it sets time code, but is in fact, running completely independently, which is quite exciting. And then the final thing, I think, in the sort of future considerations is now we've kind of moved into this world of kind of extended reality and virtual production, where we can, with a load of clever camera technology, kind of match 3D worlds to environments that have living performers in them, and broadcast these kind of bizarre and crazy experiences live out every single night. So this is a production that we did for J Balvin that was played out in the computer game Fortnite on Halloween, and it's the pumpkin. But all of this is rendered live in the media server. He performs live, and it is just captured to camera and streamed out to the audience. And throughout it, there are, I'm just going to scroll, several different looks, all of which kind of run one to the other to the other. And I think real-time tools are going to continue to change how we kind of make and create content, and how audiences expect that content to be received. So it's, I'm not sure where it's all going to lead yet, particularly because a lot of these are broadcast technologies, but soon there'll be a point where we can join them into broadcast and live, which I think is really exciting. And these things continue to be very popular. And I think for artists as well, a really nice way to connect with their fans in a different method. Excuse me. But I've sort of gone through many slides now and really just talked about creativity and people, but also I think the really interesting thing and the really important thing to acknowledge is how the content gets to the stage when it comes to making a complex and interesting show. I think a video designer needs to have a understanding of how something gets from your screen to the stage. Actually, the number of people who are involved in that and the processes, and if you understand that, you are able to respect those who do the work and give them the space and the time they need to do it. But you're also able to your own work as you make it. So, media servers, I think, are a hugely important part of what we do, and they're like your Swiss Army knife for making the show. They are where all your content goes, they're where it's all sequenced, and they're how it gets out to the stage. So I think you have to be very careful when choosing the systems by which your show is played back on. I'm not really into technology, but what I don't want is technology getting in the way of my creativity when I'm making a show. So I want the technology to serve me. Therefore, I feel it's important to spend time making sure we have the right systems on a show and the right people to deliver that. It has to be the technology is serving the designer and not the other way around. I definitely I've wanted to not do shows because I won't be able to use the systems I want to make it work, because I know it's just going to make it a horrible experience trying to get the thing on stage. And, no one's interested in making the experience of a show bad. A media server, I think, needs to be properly developed and connected with what we are doing now. It needs to be supported and it needs to listen to its user base. Otherwise, it's not a valuable piece of technology. I've been around since hard disk players and laying off content in real time and segmenting things by frame numbers and playing clips back via serial control. There's a reason we moved on from that to the kind of fully fledged 3D workflows of things like Photon and Disguise nowadays. Technology has to be able to support change. As much as video is becoming more flexible, it's still not lighting. It's not as quick to turn around a scene as it is for a lighting designer. This is an example of a page from Tempest where it just kept changing. With that, we have to be able to keep changing our cues, because time is really precious when making a show. 10, 20 years ago, the same number of days exist to make a show as they do now, but 10, 20 years ago, you didn't have moving lights, you didn't have 3D sound, you didn't have significant automation, you didn't have video. There was far less technology that needed to be made happen. Whereas now we need to make all this technology happen in the same amount of time. We have to be able to adapt live on stage to what is happening. Which brings me to my next example. This is a picture of American Psycho, which was a musical we did in 2014. And when we started at the technical rehearsals of the show, we very much thought the design was one thing. But then as we carried on, we realized it was a completely different thing. And we had to redesign the entire show in tech. So we might have scene 3 on stage as scene 4 was being programmed and scene 5 was being redesigned. And that just ran through the whole sort of 2 or 3 weeks of getting it up. And it was difficult. But, because we had the right systems in place and the right people, we were able to make that happen. I think also support from the manufacturers who make the software and hardware is really important, because, as the end user, we validate their product. It wouldn't exist if we weren't using it. Therefore, we will come up with new ideas that might not necessarily be possible. And if they're willing to go on the journey with us to make it possible, then you can open new doors to new creative potentials, new ways to tell stories, which I think is really exciting for me. I think my focus is always going to be on the creative journey in a show. But I think it's very important to set up the process to allow that to happen, because, technology has to serve creativity, and it can't be the other way around, because creativity is what tells the stories, and it's what takes the audience on the journey, and it's what gives them the experience, and it's why they come to the theatre. And that's why I do what I do, and I continue to enjoy doing what I do. So on that note, I will say thank you very much and stop talking for a second.
Thank you very much. Bueno, pues si alguien tiene alguna pregunta. Pues pues tenemos un poco de tiempo para, por si alguien tiene alguna cuestión, para hacerle a Finn. Mira, ahí arriba tenemos una pregunta.
Hi, Larry. Thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure to know about your work. I'm in conversations with Jordan Roth. I think you work with them. And I want to know, how long is the process of investigation about a new show, for example?
It's an interesting question.
And how are the tools or whatever that you use for it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. It can change a lot. Some shows are made very, very quickly, and some shows are made very, very slowly. And I'd say on average 18 months, but sometimes it can be as short as 3, depending on what is going on. Operas, but shows in the West End much quicker. So I'd always prefer to have time, particularly at the beginning, to really think about the show, get to know the show, get to understand what we're trying to do. Because I feel like, if this is the timeline, the width of the screen, I probably spend about this long, maybe this long, kind of thinking about it, and then this long actually kind of making it. So it's I feel like it's a very slow beginning and then a very kind of fast end. If that makes any sense.
Okay. ¿Alguna pregunta más? A ver.
Hola, buenos días. Perdona que te lo haga la pregunta en español, pero mi inglés es muy malo. Soy escenógrafa. Me encantaría saber cuál es tu relación de creación junto con el escenógrafo o escenógrafa. Es decir, si trabajáis tanto el concepto como el diseño del espacio conjuntamente, o en qué momento llegas tú en caso de que el espacio esté anteriormente diseñado. Es decir, ¿cuál es tu relación con el diseñador de escenografía o diseñadora? Y si en Inglaterra existen en artes escénicas, en teatro, premios para los videoescenistas en exclusiva, solamente para el trabajo de videoescena, y cómo están considerados los derechos de autor dentro de la obra escénica en Inglaterra. Gracias.
Do you understand? Okay, there are three questions. The first one is, how do you work with the stage designer? If it is the same time or you work before of the stage. The second question is if there are any awards in London for the video. And in theater, not in cinema. And the third one is derecho de autor, ¿no? You have some rights, I don't know what it's in English, for your work, for your design.
Like ownership of the design.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So first question. Working with stage designers, it's really nice to start early, like when they're first building things in model boxes, to sort of have a look and see, what video can do for that kind of space, whether it's a good space for video, whether it's bad, whether whether something is being designed that's impossible, so you can at least sort of try and make it possible because nothing's been finalized yet. So I think there's a very practical relationship there, just in terms of making things possible. Then I think there's also a lot of creative understanding is needed of each other's processes, because by what the set designer puts in their model box will really govern a lot of what the content looks like. Because if they've designed a kind of beautiful Georgian space, there's no point in projecting something that looks like Tron in it, because it'll just look stupid. And then also what you put into the space will sort of affect how the audience feel and understand it as well. So, you have quite a lot of responsibility towards one another. And I think there's also a real responsibility to make sure you explain your processes to each other at the beginning. Like, this is what I need from you at this stage of the process, and this is what I can give you at this stage. And, do you think we can make that work? So we all know what we need to sort of take from one another. So there's no surprises, I think. So I think it's always really good to, at the very beginning, just sit and kind of go from where you are now all the way through to the end and everything that you think will happen. Because I find, because video design is new still, people don't always understand our process. And I don't think it's people's responsibility to understand it. I think it's our responsibility to explain it to them and to help them understand it. I think that's the process with set designers. And, I love working with the set designers, because they sort of become, a lot of my really good friends are set designers, because we have such influence. I can't make my work without them. And if they design a very video heavy set, their set won't work without me. We become quite dependent on each other, which is nice, because you're not alone. To answer your questions about awards, specifically for video designers. In London, there is called the What's on Stage Awards. They have a category for, I think it's called Outstanding Projection Design. And I think that's the only one in the UK that I'm aware of. All the others, like the Olivier Awards and the Evening Standard and things like that, they don't. Some awards only recognize best designer. They don't even talk about lighting designer or costume designer or anything else, which I think is really reductive, because it takes a team of people to make the best design. It's not one person who does that. And then in America, in New York, there is the Drama Desk Awards has an award for best projection design as well, as does, I think it's the Ortel Awards or Lortel or something, I think. But, so far the Tonys and the big ones, the Tonys and the Oliviers, do not. That might change. It might not. We will see. And then finally, your question on ownership of work. With almost entirely, the ownership remains with me or my studio, and it is loaned by contract to the production. So we maintain the ownership of our work. Obviously, that gets complicated if you are using like stock footage and stock materials, like from Shutterstock, but I don't use that in my work. So, I hope that answers your questions.
Hola, soy Álvaro, soy diseñador de vídeo. Quería preguntar, normalmente aquí en España solemos trabajar una o dos personas en el trabajo de diseño de vídeo. Casi es un condicionante a la hora de trabajar por parte del productor. Me gustaría saber si crecer, en tu caso, con la creación de Frey Studio, y mantener un equipo de 6 o 7 personas también condiciona a la hora de elegir los proyectos que vas a hacer. O sea, si tienes que elegir proyectos también de gran envergadura, acordes con una producción grande para poder mantener lo que es el estudio, ¿no?
Yes, the question is if you choose your projects, the projects on theater or musical, etc., based on your study in the studio, because you need a lot of people for working. Here in Spain, we normally use 1 or 2 people, no? 1 o 2 personas for the team, for the video projection. And in your case, it depends of the show or doesn't matter?
It depends on the show entirely. You know, I did a show last year where it was just me. There was no assistants, no programmers. It was just a very small show, and that was really nice. I mean, I think it's normally one of 2 things where there'll be a very small team of me, like a technical person, and then maybe like an animator or assistant. Or if it's a really, really big show, then there'll be a lot of people everywhere, kind of looking after technology and then also looking after like workflow, even just keeping all the content moving around, making sure it's in the right place, making sure all the paperwork, making sure the queues are going in the right place. Because, you know, when you get into 600-700 queues in a show, it sort of becomes a person's job to manage that. So, you know, I think it's always nicer when it's just small, but sometimes it needs to get big in order to work. It just depends what you're trying to do. So, you know, like Curious Instance, I think is a good example of a small team that's just me, a programmer. And when we made it, actually, it was just me and a programmer. That was it. Then maybe occasionally we've had an animator join us. And then otherwise, you know, like Frozen, that is a much larger team of people because it's a very big system. There's a lot going on.
Okay. ¿Alguna pregunta más? Una más.
Hello, congratulations for your work. It's really amazing. I wanted to ask you, in the case of small projects that have maybe low budgets, do you think first of the budget to choose the tools when you were talking about having a lot of options, right, to choose what to use? Is there anything that maybe is something that with low budget will take or help you achieve something that looks bigger than maybe it will take you to do? I don't know if I explain myself very well, but is there anything that you choose first for tools or maybe some process to use when using low budgets to achieve something that you know that maybe if you will have a different budget, you will choose, like, I don't know, different options to use? I don't know if...
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Thank you.
I think it's a really good question. I think is, you know, when you have a very low budget, you have to be really careful about where you spend it, because I think it's good sometimes to have a limit, because it makes you it really focuses your choice. You can't do everything, so you have to choose the things that matter the most. So, I mean, I think the first thing I do, like when the budgets are low, is I think I'd probably spend, strangely, much more time thinking about what the right thing is, rather than, you know, trying lots of different things and sort of getting, you know, going in circles. So I think kind of giving yourself time to kind of creatively explore is really useful. So when you kind of get to the point of spending money, you're very sure of it, and you're very focused. You know, and tools like, you know, Adobe After Effects that, you know, is sort of, you know, you can you can almost make anything in there, and it's not terribly expensive. It's just sort of waiting for your ideas that I would use a lot. And for playing the content back onto the stage, programs like QLab are fantastic because you can do quite a lot with them, and they're quite simple, and they're very inexpensive. So there's a couple of I guess it's partly about process and about making sure you're making the right decisions, and then also about low-cost tools like After Effects and QLab that help you realize those ideas.
Buenos días, gracias por compartir tus conocimientos y tu arte. Y quería hacerte una pregunta con respecto a la relación que mantienes normalmente con el diseñador de luces o diseñadora, y desde cuándo empezáis a colaborar, desde cuándo empieza vuestro trabajo en colaboración.
Yes, the question is, what is your relationship with the light designer, and when you start to work with him or with her?
Yeah, I mean, lighting designers are also some of my best friends as well, because I think, again, our work is really dependent on each other, because, a lot of the time, if it's a projector, video is light, in the space. So you're kind of starting at the same point. So I think I always try and you want to create an atmosphere where you can collaborate together to make interesting things happen. So I think it's always interesting to have conversations very early on about, what kind of atmosphere they are thinking about. Is it going to be a really, really dark show, for example? If so, great, that makes my life slightly easier. Or, is it going to be a musical theatre where every light is on at full and, people's faces are burning, they're so bright, in which case that affects how like Mean Girls is a good example. The first conversation I had with the lighting designer for that, I was like, how are you going to light this, Ken? He's like, probably with all the lights on at all the time, because that's how this director likes his shows. I was like, okay, so we will go and see if we can afford and engineer an LED solution, because LED can be seen through all of that, whereas projection just can't. But also, I think it's about tone. Like on Harry Potter, the video is almost a lighting effect. So it has to grow out of a scene the lighting designers created, and then do something very strange, and then sort of just simmer back down into it. So it takes a lot of dialogue and understanding to try and see where they're coming from. And, if you can't give them what they need, be able to articulate why, but also have an idea for what you could do instead, rather than just say no. So, I think it's also quite important, especially with maybe some older lighting designers, to really establish that I don't work for them. I work for the production, because I've certainly had one or two older lighting designers come in and try and be my boss. And I was like, I think I'm actually working for the director and for the show here, not for you. So it's great that that's your idea, but that's not what the conversations I've had with the director or the set designer are. So we'll probably do that instead. That it rarely happens nowadays, but certainly maybe just when I was younger, I guess, they were like, okay, boy, this is how it works, sort of thing. But that's far less so now. So I think it's important also to have, to advocate for your own design as well, but kind of create that space where both exist together. And, if the work that I've done is credited to a lighting designer because the reviewer or whoever cannot tell the difference between the video and the lighting at that point, then that's a really great thing. That says we've done our job well.
One more.
Congrats for your work. Just a question about techniques. You speak sometimes about real-time tools, and I like to know what specific software Isadora, Unreal? What software you prefer for real-time time tools?
Yeah, it's a good question because it feels like there's a new thing every week. So we, after a lot of kind of time and thinking and trying lots of different things, we use Notch because we've used that for a long time, which is especially good for live work. And we use Unreal, are the two platforms that we kind of support as a studio, largely because we found them nice companies to work with when we have questions or need a new idea building. But also they just work, I think. I think Unreal is great for making something look very real, and Notch is very good for making something look very strange. So that might be the two ways we choose to use them. But they certainly are, they've really changed how we make work. Like, it's almost been like reinventing our workflow in the past kind of 18 months, but we can do stuff so much more quickly now, which is great because in this current kind of post-COVID or mid-COVID climate, no one is deciding to do anything till just before it's about to happen. So being able to work quickly is important, but also, you know, in a theater, when someone has a great idea, it's really nice to be able to respond to that quickly.
¿Algo más? Ok, pues terminamos entonces la jornada de hoy. Thank you very much for your amazing job and to talk with us. And we hope to enjoy your show here in Spain very soon.
Thank you. Nice to speak to you all. I hope you have a nice day. Sorry I can't be there in reality.
Don't worry. Thank you very much.
Para hacer una salida ordenada, por favor sigan las indicaciones de nuestro personal de sala.